take a deep breath, take the higher road. That's what they always say, as if they know the way. They won't take it from me. But don't ever doubt yourself, 'cause life ain't just a dream. You make your own, so kick and scream. The people will act with a never-ending force. You never had the chance, so what you waiting for? The day has come, my friend, 'cause this is war. It's time and this is war.
Today we're diving into a crucial and contentious topic that's been making waves in healthcare and society: the devastating consequences associated with gender-affirming care. With zero regard for the long-term effects of hormone therapy and puberty blockers being administered to children and adolescents, supporters of this evil agenda claim they do so out of love and compassion for those who are struggling with their gender identity. These quote-unquote treatments have irreversible impacts on fertility, bone density, and overall physical development. We must ask ourselves, how can we as a society be fully aware of the consequences these interventions have on growing bodies and minds and allow this to continue? Another critical issue is the probability of misdiagnosis or hasty decisions. Feelings of dysphoria are in many cases linked to underlying mental health conditions or temporary phases of exploration. Rushing into permanent medical interventions without thorough psychological evaluation could lead to regret and further complications down the line. We must also consider the ethical implications of performing irreversible butchery on minors who may not fully comprehend the lifelong consequences of their decisions. Are we truly serving their best interest by allowing such drastic measures before they've even reached full cognitive maturity? You're listening to Nurses Out Loud on America Out Loud Talk Radio. I'm your host, Nurse Kimberly Overton. Before we get started today, I do want to encourage our listeners, if you have questions or comments, or perhaps you want to share your own experiences with what you're seeing on the front lines of healthcare, you can now submit those to any of the hosts by emailing them directly to nurses@americaoutloud.com. We would love to hear from you. We encourage all of you to engage in the battle and find your voice in this fight. But until you are able to do that, we will continue to be that voice for you. I'm joined today by fellow RN and frequent collaborator here on Nurses Out Loud, Nurse David Wayne, to discuss this topic and much more. David, thanks so much for coming on today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Kim. This is a topic I'm very passionate about.
You know, you and me both, because we've seen so much of this, and I really don't, I'm trying to pinpoint when exactly did this gender insanity begin? And I can go back about as far as, I want to say to the Obama years, like 2008 or so. Would you agree?
For me here in the Midwest, the first time I started working with adolescents in an inpatient psychiatric setting was in 2012. And there was no such thing as a non-binary patient here in my neck of Wisconsin. And by 2017, 2018, all of a sudden it was the majority of the patients we were seeing. So it was incredibly rapid. This just really came out of the blue, and it left a lot of us scratching our heads wondering what was going on, because there was obviously a phenomenon at foot, and we were hearing these things that were completely contradictory to all these long understood foundations of psychiatry. So it was very rapid. And then what we were hearing about it from the people who were, supposedly the experts in explaining this to us, like our local university Pride Council, the things they were telling us just made absolutely no sense to the people who've been working in psychiatry for any amount of time. It was just it completely contradicted all this foundational knowledge that we have about adolescence and that we have about drag queens and people with autogynephilia and transgender adults. It was just, we were all just kind of looking around, scratching our heads, and honestly afraid to speak up, because you put your toe over the line and all of a sudden you're a bigot and your job is at risk and you're canceled, and a lot of people keep their heads down.
Yeah, society's really kind of gone down this insane path. It's like I said, maybe 2008, 2009, I feel like we started to see it kind of starting to rear its head. But yeah, you're right. Like in probably 2016, moving forward, it has just exploded. And, we have, I mean, I don't care how many, what high school you go to, there's just a large amount of these children that don't know if they're a boy or a girl. And I feel like they are being groomed, and I think they're being groomed from a very young age. I mean, I've seen these books. Gender Queer is one of the books, and there's a couple of others that are available in these school libraries. These books are vulgar, and they go into great detail, very sexually explicit, to the point where when they were reading them at a school board meeting here in my local county, Sumner County, and it was embarrassing for the adults to hear it. Yet they wanted to have these books available to children, 8 years old, 9 years old.
Yeah, absolutely. We had those books in the schools around here too. This is a small Midwestern town, and you use the term grooming, and we use this other kind of charged language on this topic. And I guess I'd like to give a little bit of a disclaimer about that charged language, because people might hear that and think that we're a little over the top, or we're kind of zealots, or we're not approaching this topic with nuance, and we're not being kind. But I think it's really important to draw a distinction between transgender adults who do exist and who do deserve dignity, and things need to be discussed with nuance. We need to figure out how they can have fulfilled and safe adulthoods, but that is something that is completely different than drag queens or people with autogynephilia, which is a kink where they are sexually aroused by presenting themselves as a caricature of a woman. That's similar to men in women's sports. A typical transgender person would be mortified to be in a locker room. They have so much dysphoria about their body. The last thing they want is to call attention to it. And that is something completely different than we see with a lot of transgender athletes. And all that is completely different than children. Children are an entirely different topic. Identity crisis during adolescence is a rite of passage. It's something that everybody goes through. And the fact that we have medicalized it in these ways that lead to these incredibly horrific medical complications is contradictory to all our foundational knowledge in psychiatry. And it is completely fair to use very charged language. It is completely fair to say that this is a stain on psychiatry that is going to be far worse than lobotomies, just given the scope of what we're doing and the long-term repercussions of what's happening to these kids. So just wanted to throw that out there, that we make a clear distinction between kids, drag queens, and transgender adults. These are all different topics, and what we see way too often is that these things just get kind of lumped together. And if you're against any of it, then you're against all of it, and you're a bigot, and you deserve to be canceled, and you're censored, and all that sort of thing.
Right. And I completely would agree with you. And I believe that everybody deserves to be treated with compassion and with love, regardless of their choices. And I agree with you. And it's completely different when you're talking about an adult who is a transgender, who has chosen to live their life in a certain way. I'm not judging anyone, but when you're coming for children, you cannot tell me that all of these children across the country, all of a sudden, just in the last, decade or so, all of a sudden that they don't know if they're a boy or a girl. This is clearly the results of grooming, and this is parents, this is teachers, educational systems, and peer pressure from their friends. And I think we're going down a really, really slippery slope. But when we talk about the risks involved with things like hormone therapy. I mean, hormone therapy carries risks of blood clots, of heart attacks, strokes, diabetes, cancer. Long-term hormone therapy can cause temporary or permanent infertility. Why would we even consider doing this with children? And most parents are, very, most parents are not really wanting, to go along with this, but I feel like parents are being coerced into agreeing to have these surgeries and these puberty blockers given to their children with the threat of, well, if you don't do this, your child is going to be depressed and is going to commit suicide. Have you seen that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And that is exactly how they are coerced. They are asked, would you rather have a living son or a dead daughter? And it is wildly manipulative. And then the logic behind that statement makes absolutely no sense, because what they're saying is, these trans kids have always been there. It's just we're finally accepting enough to affirm them. And if we don't affirm them, they'll commit suicide in mass, except that their outcomes aren't better. They don't see decreases in depression. They don't see decreases in suicidal thoughts. We didn't have this rash of unexplained youth suicides in decades past because we had all these transgender youth and we just hadn't gotten there yet as a society to affirm them. The logic behind that is non-existent, and that the way that is framed is incredibly manipulative, both to the parents and to the adolescent who's sitting in on that conversation and is having that seed planted by a supposed healthcare professional. It is wildly irresponsible, and this should be nothing new to mental health professionals, because we've seen peer contagion before. We saw it in the 90s, especially with eating disorder breakouts amongst teen girls, especially, where we would see these happen in peer groups, and it would be like anorexia would spread wild, just with certain people, just with people who were friends. And it was body dysmorphia, where you have these kind of delusional thoughts and obsessions that lead you to look at yourself in a way that's not truthful. I've seen adult women who weigh 80 some pounds who believe that they're fat. Do you think that should be affirmed? Of course that should not be affirmed. It's wildly irresponsible to affirm delusional beliefs that a person might have about their body. I've also worked with people who would develop delusional beliefs about things like their left eyeball. Worked with a patient who denucleated himself because he believed that there was something evil in his eye when he was psychotic. He literally removed his own eyeball with his hand, and he felt great about it because in his mind, that's what needed to be done. It needed to go. And obviously, that's not something that should ever be affirmed. But here we are. We're doing it with kids and their genitals. And the experts themselves who are engaging in this are aware that these kids are not able to give informed consent about these things. We know that from the WPATH files, which is essentially the organization who sets the standards of care at a national level for transgender youth, headed by people like Marcy Bowers, the most prominent gender surgeon in the country. And in their internal communications and their internal chats and videos and that sort of thing, they discuss how teenagers aren't able to actually understand what it means that they're going to be infertile, that they're never going to have children. And instead of seeing that as an absolute travesty and a reason to hit the brakes, they're still full speed ahead because they are completely dogmatic about it. And it has nothing to do with science. This is not evidence-based care. This is an absolutely dogmatic topic for them.
Right. And I mean, I think about, going back to my own teenage years, and I mean, I'm certainly not anywhere near, the person that I was at 13, 14. I mean, I've obviously matured and changed, and I don't want any of the same things that I wanted when I was 14 years old at 47. So to think that they are going to be able to make these life-altering decisions at this young age is so incredibly irresponsible. And there is not a medical professional alive that should be able to feel okay and feel like this is somehow ethically appropriate to do these types of it's butchery. I don't know any other way to say it, David. This is butchery.
Yeah, it is. I've gotten there. It's taken me a long time, and I've done a lot of reading on this topic. I've talked to a lot of people. I've listened to a lot of conversations. I've worked with these patients, and I'm there with you. It is butchery. You don't need to take my word for it, though. Anybody who's unconvinced, just go to the Reddit forums for detransitioners, r/detrans, and just read their stories. Just read about the things that they're going through. Read about the grief that they have, that they'll never get their voice back, that they've castrated themselves, that they will never have children, that they will never have an orgasm. Read about how it affects their romantic relationships. Read about how it affects their body hair. Read the absolute despair that they have with what's been done to them. This forum grew from just 20,000 people when I discovered it a few years ago. It's up to 40 or 50,000 people in it now. Like there are so many signs that we need to absolutely hit the brakes on this. It is insane to me that we are still doing this in this country. All the countries who have been doing this ahead of us have hit the brakes. Like the UK has hit the brakes, Sweden's hit the brakes, the Scandinavian countries, which are so egalitarian and so woke, they've all completely reversed course on this stuff because they've looked at their evidence, they've looked at their long-term outcomes, they've looked at the evidence behind the guidelines, and they've said, whoa, this is a huge problem. We need to stop this immediately.
And it's becoming easier and easier to do these types of surgeries. I noticed, I started a new job. I was looking through my insurance benefits, and, sure enough, if I wanted to do so, I would be able to get gender reassignment surgery covered at 100% under my insurance.
Yeah, and it's easier, and there are states passing legal protections that they will do this to your child without parental consent. Minnesota is one of those states. They passed a trans refuge law that was in response to all the states who were banning gender-affirming care for minors in their state, like Texas and Tennessee, and other states like California and Minnesota passed laws where they will interfere in parental rights in order to do these permanent medical procedures against a parent's wishes.
Absolute travesty. And we see that happening, not just with this issue, but parental rights is a huge problem. We see the weaponization of CPS by hospitals. We saw that very clearly with the medical kidnapping of children like Autumn Shaw. We've covered that case extensively. But we see this happening all the time. And, when you take your child into a doctor for their, well care visit, we see them trying to separate parents from the child. We see that all the time. And they start asking these very sensitive questions when the parent is not in the room. Like, do you feel like you're a boy or a girl? Like, I can't even believe that they're asking and planting these types of seeds. If a child were feeling this way, why could we not just address that individual child's issue? Why are we even planting seeds like this in children? This is not normal.
Yeah, it's not normal. And I think it goes back to a longstanding agenda that is meant to erode the parent-child relationship because it's foundational to Western society, along with Judeo-Christian values. And there are forces afoot that want to kind of topple that. And that's where a lot of this ideology springs from. This is critical race theory. This is critical gender theory. These are some old Marxist ideas. This is postmodern Marxism, and they want to erode these family connections. They want to erode communities. And there's some extent to which they want us talking about this. They want us having debates about transgender care, and they want us having debates about abortion, because these culture war issues are a way to distract us from the way that our authoritarian overlords are completely fleecing and gutting the middle class, and it's kind of a distraction from the class war that's going on. It's if they can get all the peasants fighting about abortion and fighting about trans rights, and it's not that they aren't important issues. Obviously, it gets me fired up, and obviously, I think this is a really, really important issue. But at the end of the day, it is also a distraction from the class warfare that's going on. You don't have to look any further than the transfer of wealth that happened during COVID, or the transfer of wealth that happened during the 2008 housing market collapse, where so many people lost their businesses. So many people lost their homes. So many people lost their retirements. And instead of us unifying and going after all the people responsible for that, we're just here bickering about gender affirming care and about abortion and that sort of thing. And again, it's not that these fights aren't important, especially if it's your child, but this culture war stuff is a distraction from the bigger war at hand, in my opinion.
Oh, I completely agree with you. It's divide and conquer. And I've been saying for a really long time, people need to understand that it is not a left or right issue. It is definitely an up or down issue. And as long as they have us, distracted and divided and fighting with one another, then we are not paying attention to what they're doing, at the top, the powers that be that are really pulling all of the strings. I really say all the world is the stage, and it truly is. But we're talking about parental rights. A lot of parents don't understand that in some states, you really need to familiarize yourself with your state's specific state laws. But there are some states where the child can actually consent to vaccination at, I believe it's age 13. That is the age of consent in many states for vaccination. So if you're thinking about things like the HPV vaccine, which is being very heavily pushed now on both boys and girls at the age of 13, 14, as they reach adolescence. If you don't want your child vaccinated, I think it's so important. First of all, number one, know what the age of consent is in your specific state, and understand that there are a lot of instances where you can send your child to school. They can be even under the age of 13. Like the WHO holds vaccine clinics in schools, and they have in their documentation, it's very clearly stated that there's implied consent. So if the WHO is holding one of these vaccine clinics in your child's school, and you send your child to school that day, then that's considered by the WHO as implied consent. They figured that if you didn't want your child to get vaccinated, you would have kept them home from school, because we know everything that goes on right at our child's school on a day-to-day basis. If we're not, working or doing other things, and our children tell us everything that's going on at the school. We get every notice, right?
Right.
So that's something that you really need to be aware of as parents. And also understanding that, I remember a case where there was a child, I think it was maybe a middle schooler, that ended up getting the COVID vaccine. He was bribed with, I think, pizza or tacos or something like that. So there's all of that peer pressure. So make sure that your children are educated on vaccines and know your position on vaccinations and what you would want, that you would not want them to be vaccinated, so that they will not be so easily coerced when they're offered a pizza or an ice cream party in order to get a vaccine in school. So I think that's really, really important to have these conversations with your children.
Absolutely. Parents need to be so vigilant these days about what's going on at their kids' schools. It's a really terrifying day and age to be a parent. That's for sure.
Yeah, I thank God every day. My son is about to be 30, and I don't even like to say that, but I mean, on the other hand, I'm just so grateful that he is, out of school and kind of didn't really miss all the insanity. I mean, he got the tail end of it, with all of this being ushered into the school system. And it really is being ushered in and really baked into the curriculum of these schools. I mean, I have teachers on the inside that have really been morally conflicted with the lessons that they are having to teach these children. So trust me, it is, the gender affirming care, and then, like you alluded to earlier, the critical race theory, all of these things are being baked into these curriculums, and they are being taught to your children, more than likely contradictory to what your family values are. I always say, if you can do it, find a way, homeschool. I would not want to put my children in public school at this time, not in this day and age.
Yeah, absolutely. What came to mind for me recently, you used the term grooming again, and I had to do my state mandatory reporter training as a nurse. This is a couple of years ago now, but it was going through the definition of what a groomer is, and it's like, wow, this definition applies to a whole lot of teachers at this point. It's adults who are having secretive sexual conversations with children without parental consent or knowledge. And it's like, do they realize that they're describing most elementary school teachers these days? It's I think the term groomer is a fair term to use. It fits the definition. Let me get your opinion on something though, because I'm kind of obviously you and I both agree about what an absolute travesty doing medical interventions for confused youth and interfering in parental rights is completely over the line. But I also hesitate to endorse the states that are completely banning gender affirming care for youth, because I don't like any government interfering in the doctor-patient relationship. I feel like that's one of the lessons of COVID. If there was any instance where it should maybe be done, this is one where it deserves discussion. But honestly, what I would like to see is states grease the wheels of the judicial system so that these doctors who are performing this butchery on children can be sued out of existence, rather than setting the precedent of having the government tell doctors what they can and can't do with patients. What do you think about that take?
Yeah, and I think I agree with you, because I want the government out of everything. I mean, the government should be as limited as possible. So I do agree with you there. And I think that once we have some legal implications and consequences for these doctors, I mean, I can't imagine 20 years ago that any of these doctors would have thought that this was a good idea to do on a child. But I agree with you. I feel like we should be having a return to, common sense, that we need to get to a place where we wouldn't even consider doing this to a child. Maybe they have a conversation, but I can't believe that this is. I just can't. I am just beyond myself.
I can kind of tell you how it happens, because I know a lot of adolescent psychiatrists, and they don't engage with this type of care, but they work with all sorts of patients who are involved in it. And what happens is we have a system full of absolute cowards who won't stand up and speak. And what they do is they just punt. They just say like, well, I'm not an expert on this, so I'll refer you to somebody who is. And then that expert, that person that they get referred to, is an absolute zealot. And they are dogmatic, and they are completely on board with it. And anybody who's not is a bigot and is transphobic. And that's what happens. We have way too many people in the medical industry who are absolute cowards, who aren't standing up and calling this stuff out. And they keep their heads down. They'll refill prescriptions, they'll deal with whatever crisis is at hand. And then with all the gender stuff, they'll just say, oh, I need to refer you to somebody who's an expert on gender affirming care. And then the kid gets shuffled off to a doctor, and the parents are along for the ride because, you listen to what the doctors say. And then they land with one of these absolute activists who's ready to get the scalpels out.
Yeah, you're 100% right. And if anything, COVID showed us anything, it is how complicit, everybody's completely silent, and cowardice. The cowardice that we witnessed in the medical field, nurses, doctors, you're right, just keeping their head down and punting and saying, I'm not the one. I'm not going to stand up. And what can I do? What can I do to change this situation? I'm just going to pass the buck and keep my head down and go along to get along. And that's unfortunately what we're seeing everywhere. Nobody is standing up for these children, for patients' rights, for informed consent. And these are all things that I'm very passionate about. I know you are as well.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, we have a lot more to dig into, but we are going to take a very quick break. America Out Loud Talk Radio plays on the iHeartRadio network. You can also listen on our media player from any web browser anywhere in the world. We have the best in-class apps available on Apple, Android, or Alexa, 24/7. Great talk radio. All of our shows go to podcast the following day. You can hear them on apps such as Spotify, Stitcher, Pandora, iHeart Podcasts, and many more. Be sure to subscribe and rate the show on Apple Podcasts for me. Don't forget to check out our online store at americaoutloud.shop, where you can find all of the products that we represent on our network at a discounted rate, including an incredible line of products from Chemical Free Body. Unlike the majority of supplements you'll find on the market today, with chemical-free body, you won't have to worry about harmful ingredients, binders, fillers, or flow agents. Their ultra-safe breakthrough nanosilver technology destroys pathogens, balances the microbiome, and boosts immunity. All of these products are proudly made in the USA and are backed by an unheard-of double-your-money-back guarantee. I've made a twice-daily Green 85 drink part of my routine, which has led to a decrease in belly bloat and an increase in my energy throughout the day. Use promo code OUTLOUD to save 20% off the Healthy Gut Bundle. I'll catch you on the other side of this break. Stay with us.
It's time and this is what.
Cardiovascular disease is the leading cause of death and disability. Lifestyle changes are critical, but you can also support your heart with concentrated nutrients. Healthy Cell created Heart and Vascular Health to support cholesterol and blood pressure with CoQ10, vitamin K2, resveratrol, and soluble fiber. And Healthy Cell's not a pill, it's a patent-pending gel you swallow. Get heart healthy. Go to healthycell.com and use code OUTLOUD for 25% off your first order. Healthycell.com, code OUTLOUD for 25% off.
Got gastrointestinal issues? We created a 3-step, doctor-formulated, completely natural gut reboot system that takes less than 2 minutes a day to start working for you. Step 1. Gut Detox Formula, a gentle way to clean the intestines and balance the body. Step 2, Nano Silver Solution, a safe way to restore gut bacteria balance and protect us from pathogens. Step 3, Green 85 Juice Formula, a simple way to replace the 85% of nutrition farmed out of our soil so our body can repair itself and increase energy levels. Go to chemicalfreebody.com/outloud today. Get the Malcolm Healthy Gut Bundle, reboot your gut and your energy, and save 20% on your first order.
I'm Dr. James Bragman. Do you suffer from allergies, sinus problems, or just seem to be getting sick more often? You're not alone. Many of my patients are finding relief with Cofix RX nasal spray. I've relied on the sanitizing power of povidone iodine for years. Cofix RX has harnessed that power to help cleanse germs, allergens, and viruses in your nasal cavity. You brush your teeth and wash your hands daily. Stay healthy by using Cofix RX to wash and cleanse your nose daily. Get Cofix RX today. Go to America Out Loud Shop and click on the Cofix RX banner, or type in cofixrx.com/outloud. Buy now and receive a 20% discount with a 30-day money-back guarantee.
The buildup of spike proteins is dangerous to your health. Global Healing's Foreign Protein Cleanse detoxes your body, removing the spike proteins, allowing your body to repair from within. Formulated by Dr. Edward Group and by Dr. Brian Ardis, Foreign Protein Cleanse targets and detoxes spike proteins in the body. Go to americaoutloud.shop and get 15% off using the code OUTLOUD. Global Healing, giving you the power to take control of your health naturally.
World-class care from doctors you can trust, all from the comfort of your home. That is One Wellness. Dr. Peter McCullough and his team at The Wellness Company launched the One Wellness membership to provide free monthly supplements and unlimited telemedicine access with doctors that share your values. The Wellness Company's Chief Medical Board designed every supplement and medical protocol with your health in mind. From groundbreaking supplements like the Spike Support Formula to unique care like Freedom from Big Pharma. Join a healthcare system that puts your health and well-being above the interest of Big Pharma's bottom line. It's the way healthcare should be, with a company that shares your values. Go to OutLoudCare.com today and use code OUTLOUD for 25% off your first month of One Wellness.
When God, through His grace and mercy, gave us free will, the will of the people was to live freely. To that end, we fight for the liberty of all at a time when global tyranny threatens us as never before in mankind's history. This vision is manifest at AmericaOutloud.news, a site for all who cherish free will and freedom. Now is our time, my fellow Americans. America Out Loud Talk Radio. Liberty and justice for all.
Time and this
Welcome back to Nurses Out Loud in America Out Loud Talk Radio. I'm your host, Nurse Kimberly Overton. Wherever you're listening from today and whatever you're doing, I thank you for giving me the gift of your time. Be sure to make AmericaOutloud.news your daily stop for all the latest news and happenings. We all must do our part and share the stories, the articles, the podcasts, and videos so we can help secure America's future. If you're just joining us, I've been talking with fellow RN, frequent collaborator here on Nurses Out Loud, Nurse David Wayne, and we have been talking about gender-affirming care in this country and a whole host of other topics. So we're going to jump right back in. David, let's talk a little bit about the controversy at the Olympics with male boxers, or maybe not male boxers, and fighting in the women's division. What is your take on all of that insanity?
Yeah, this is a really interesting development in the whole controversy. It's almost a Rorschach test. It's almost an inkblot test that just shows where people stand on the issue, because everybody got their hackles up so quickly. And it's actually a situation that does deserve some nuance to it. So one of the things that came out of it that I think is interesting is the way that the left uses small pedantic details to completely, in their fact checks, to completely undermine somebody's argument and to say, like, well, this person's a right-wing extremist because I found this small detail that they gave that was wrong. So in this case, it's that these were transgender boxers, and it is true that these were not transgender boxers. These were not men who decided that they identified as women. These were people who have apparently they have some sort of disorder of sexual development. So the fact checks coming from the left that say that these are not transgender boxers, that is true. These are not people who socially transitioned. These were people who were born with a hormonal disorder. Essentially, their body does not respond to testosterone like it's supposed to. And so they appeared to be female at birth. They were raised as females, but they went through some manner of male puberty. And at the end of the day, what's important is the fact that they went through male puberty. They have the athletic benefits that come from having extra testosterone, that come from having male testosterone. And it's not about transgender athletes invading female locker rooms. It's about female sports being for females only, because that's the only way it's fair. And if you have an athlete that's gone through male puberty, it is not fair, and they should not compete in female sports. End of story, in my opinion.
Correct. I completely agree with you there. I completely agree with that. It's not that I don't sympathize. I do. I think that's I can't even imagine what that must be like to be born and raised as a female. But like you said, at the end of the day, she has an unfair advantage. And at the end of the day, that's all that should matter.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is a wildly unfair advantage that extra testosterone gives people. And you only have to look at the Olympics to see that is obviously true. You've got the 1988 Olympics saw the greatest female track and field athlete of all time, Florence Griffith Joyner. She set all the women's sprinting records. She set the record in the 100 meter. She set the record in the 200 meter. Fastest woman ever. Her record times are beat every single year by men at the national level, men who are in college. In fact, her records are beat every single year by high school boys. Every single year in nationals, there are high school boys who run faster than the fastest woman of all time. That's how much of an advantage testosterone gives to people. And when you're talking about combat sports, this is wildly unsafe for women. In track and field, it's just unfair. But when you're talking actual contact sports like that, it is wildly unsafe. I watch the UFC. I'm a fan of the UFC, and they have a couple weight classes where there's overlap between the men's divisions and the women's divisions. And if you watch a couple guys fight at 135 pounds or 145 pounds, and then you watch a couple women fight at those weights, there is absolutely there is a stark contrast that the men are so much faster, so much stronger. It's really, really dangerous to have men competing against women in combat sports. Not that those women aren't absolute badasses. They would beat the hell out of me. But you put them up, at the elite levels, it's just no. This should not even be a topic for conversation. This situation at the Olympics is completely different than Leah Thomas, though. Who
Right.
competed as a man and then transitioned to a woman and then paraded around in women's locker rooms. And again, that is something that is different than other transgender people who have all this body shame and issues with self-esteem and definitely don't want to be seen naked by rooms full of people. That to me suggests that there's some sort of autogynephilia going on. There's some sort of kink involved where, being seen as a caricature of a woman is arousing to this person. This is a well-known phenomenon in psychiatry. The research on it goes back decades and decades and decades. And I'm not even saying that with judgment. I've been to a drag show and it was fun, but it was definitely geared towards adults. It was not something where you would want to bring a child. And the drag queen wants every single eye in the room on them. They want them to partake in what they're engaged in, versus the transgender person doesn't want any attention brought to the fact that they're transgender. These are two completely different things.
Agreed. And let me ask you really quickly your opinion on this. So coming from looking at the situation in the Olympics, do you think that this was a coincidence? Because it seems like it's probably not a coincidence. Like all of a sudden, this is just kind of thrown in our face. And I feel like it's probably very much by design.
Well, the way that the opening ceremony went, that was clearly intent to be thrown in our face. That was a clearly a mockery of Christianity. So yeah, there is. I think there was intention behind that. The IOC boxing committee made a decision here, just like the people who were in charge of the opening ceremony made their decisions. They had reasons for those decisions.
Yeah, I agree. It just seems a little too convenient, just with the times that we're living in, that this would be, brought on such a massive stage in front of the world.
Yeah, it's interesting too that these athletes came from countries like the one was from Algeria, I think it was, where they are not exactly known for transgender rights or LGBTQIA plus rights, and we see these weird overlaps from people on the left where we see them kind of in some cases being this is a minefield to even talk about, so I'm trying to be careful with my words, but sympathizing with kind of Islamist extremists in some ways. And if we want to talk about civilian casualties and stuff like that, that's a very complex conversation, but it's just the intersectionality is weird. Sometimes the literal intersectionality, like street intersections where you have people marching for the Palestinians colliding with pride parades, like we saw. There's just weird alliances being formed in the world, and a lot of them have the same ends in mind, and that is, like we talked about before, it's the destruction of Western society, which is based on Judeo-Christian values. There's weird alliances.
Yeah, I agree. That much has been made very, very clear, is that they are trying to destroy Western society, the nuclear family, and that's been happening for quite some time.
Yeah, and they're not shy about it. I mean, it's an overtly stated claim of different groups, of some of the foundational theorists of critical race theory and critical gender theory. It's a foundational belief of the Muslim Brotherhood. Like, it's not conspiratorial. Like they are very open about, like, hey, this is the plan.
Yeah. And I mean, where do we go from here? I mean, I don't know. I don't know where we go from here. It just seems to be the absurdities just keep getting piled on, and I just don't know. Like, I mean, what's yeah, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
What is the next thing that we're going to be dealing with? It's election year, so buckle up.
Right. Yeah. I just saw that they've declared monkeypox they declared it a global health emergency or something like that, which I don't think people need to be worried about lockdowns or any of that nonsense. I believe that the only reason the World Health Organization did that is because there needs to be a declared global health emergency in order for a lot of different jurisdictions in the U.S. to do mail-in balloting, and so it's about the election. And it's kind of like the bird flu is not about bringing lockdowns back or anything like that. It's about controlling the food supply.
Right.
What we do about that, I'm not exactly sure.
Exactly. And somebody sent me this today, and I had not had any a chance to really do any research about it, but I'm just sharing it because you mentioned the monkeypox, and it was said the AstraZeneca jab contained monkeypox, and it shows a package insert for the AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccine, and it says that it contains chimpanzee adenovirus vector.
Interesting. So that makes me think of the SV40 promoters that were used with the mRNA vaccines, and the issue with those goes back, to some of the first polio vaccines. SV40 was part of a simian monkey virus that they used to grow monkey kidney cells in big vats to create vaccines. It was part of the production process, and that was something that's supposed to be filtered out. It's supposed to be. It's not supposed to be in the final product, because when it is, it causes enormous issues. It's one of the many problems with COVID vaccines that wasn't filtered out. So I wonder if it's something like that, if it's part of the production process. When they switch from small scale manufacturing to mass production with these vaccines, they use different manufacturing processes, which is one of the failures of the FDA, was that they approved mRNA vaccines that were made in one way, and then when things switched to mass production, the vaccines were made another way. But the product is the process. You can't approve something made one way and then say it counts for something that's made another way. They switched from replicating mRNA via PCR to using these giant vats where you need to filter out DNA contaminants. You need to filter out the SV40, and it's becoming abundantly clear that there were batches where they had just wildly higher rates of adverse events and contaminants and issues like that.
Right. And there were some cases of monkeypox that were popping up. How true that was, I don't know. But I always wanted to know, like, what's their vaccination status? Because it would be my firm belief that the people that were coming up with the monkeypox were likely vaccinated with the COVID vaccine. I don't know.
As I understand it, and I'm not an expert on this one, but as I understand it, monkeypox is a disease of the gay community. It's spread man to man via sexual contact, and one of the reasons it dropped out of the headlines quite suddenly was because Rochelle Walensky was taking questions on it, and somebody asked her about children who were coming down with monkeypox, and she basically had to say, yeah, we've looked into it, and those children were very adjacent to the at-risk community for this disease, which she had just gotten done explaining was men having sex with men.
Right. Frightening. I mean, it's just absolutely frightening what is happening, and that we are letting it continue. When do we say enough is enough and stand up in great numbers to say no more?
Yeah, I don't know. One of the things that's really frustrating for me to see is we have these presidential candidates out there, and we even have like President Trump is still doubling down on the COVID vaccines. He's still saying that they were, he wants to take credit for them as his accomplishment, which Project Warp Speed was under his administration, and he's still very proud of them. And it's very concerning to me that he's still so pro COVID vaccine. It seems like such an easy win for him to say, hey, they lied to me and we're going to get them if you reelect me. All these people who are thinking about voting for RFK Jr., that's where RFK is really distinguishing himself from the Democrats and from Trump. And Trump, the greatest failure of his first administration, in my opinion, is that he promised to drain the swamp, and then he surrounded himself with all these absolute swamp creatures when he actually got to Washington. The Reince Priebus's and the Michael Boltons and the guy he put in charge of the FEC and he made all these cabinet appointments of just absolute swamp creatures who stabbed him in the back and made sure that the game kept getting played as usual. And again, when we're talking about things like transgender healthcare and abortion and stuff like that, it's to distract us from these absolute monsters who are running Washington, who it doesn't matter if we have a Democrat or a Republican in charge of the White House, because they're the ones who are actually in charge. And the whole Democrat versus Republican thing is kind of a distraction so that we don't get our act together and get Washington peacefully purged of these people who are actually calling the shots.
Yeah, it's an absolute farce because, it's not a left or right issue. It's an up or down issue. And whoever we have in there, Republican, Democrat, whatever, they're not the ones pulling the strings. You think Joe Biden is in charge of anything right now?
Oh, yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's so frustrating. It's so frustrating, and it is a completely bipartisan issue. Like, you vote for somebody, you send them to Washington. I don't care if it's AOC or if it's somebody like Ron Johnson from my state. Ron Johnson petitioned the I think it was the NIH, when they were coming out with these recommendations that were being the basis for policy. He asked them for their data, like, hey, why are you saying such and such about masking? Why are you saying such and such about school closures? Show me the data upon which you're making these recommendations. It's not classified. And you know what they do? They just ignore them. They don't give it to them. This is a person that voters sent to Washington. Again, I don't care if it's a super conservative. I don't care if it's somebody who's super liberal. If people voted for them and sent them to Washington or to represent them, and then these swampy, essentially deep state actors just snub their nose when our elected officials ask them for unclassified information about topics that set policy that had an enormous impact on the citizens of this country, like that's a bipartisan problem. That speaks to the need to reform the Justice Department, because the only way that these people are held accountable is through the Justice Department, but the Justice Department is completely captured too. So what do we even do? We can go and vote for somebody, send them to Washington, and then what? They have no power. They're given 4,000-page omnibus bills that get passed after 2 hours in the middle of the night that nobody actually read. We have to pass it so that we can read it, Nancy Pelosi famously said. It's written by lobbyists. It's written by the swamp, and then our elected officials are just they have no real power. That's where I think so many of the people who support Trump, they want to see that change. So many of the people who support Bobby Kennedy, they want to see that change. But with Trump, I'm really worried that he's got some swampy people advising his campaign, like Susie Wiles, who works. She's the co-chair of the Mercury Group, which is basically a pharma lobbying group, and that's who's running Trump's campaign right now. That's not a good sign. That's not a good sign.
Yeah. Real quickly before we're almost out of time, but I'd like to get your take on the two VP picks. So JD Vance and Tim Walz. What are your thoughts?
I like JD Vance. I like JD Vance. I do not like Tim Walz. Tim Walz is he made Minnesota a trans refuge state, which obviously I feel very strongly about. Yeah, he was very authoritarian during COVID. He's a disaster. He was terrible during all the BLM stuff. He's not somebody I would want to have the powers of vice president, because the things that he's done as governor have been absolutely horrible. And I really wish there wasn't all this pedantic bickering over the stolen valor controversy. This is another thing where we see the left doing these little fact checks, like, oh, you got this little detail wrong, therefore this isn't a thing. The stolen valor thing is important, and he, in my opinion, is definitely guilty of it, but that is the least of our worries with this guy. When you look at his policy positions, he is an absolute radical. He will interfere in the parent-child relationship. He was a disaster during COVID. He was a disaster during the BLM riots in his city. People should watch the documentary called The Fall of Minneapolis. It is on Rumble. It's about the Derek Chauvin trial and everything that happened. It's a really deep dive from a local reporter who talks to all sorts of police who were involved in it and investigators, and it is extremely well done and extremely disturbing. It is worth a watch. And as you're watching it, remember, this is Tim Walz's Minnesota that this happened in.
Right. And I'm going to have you, David, if you would, send me the link to that, and we'll include it in the show notes so that the listeners can take a look at that. With that, we're about just about out of time. But David, thank you so much for joining me. It's always an incredibly informative and spirited conversation when you join us, and I so appreciate you.
Oh, thank you so much for the opportunity.
Of course. And that is all the time that we have for today, friends. But remember, we are here on the air 5 days a week, Monday through Friday at 10 a.m. Eastern, with a different nurse host daily. You can also catch the encore at 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Please be sure to tune in and listen to myself and my amazing sister and brother nurses as we walk you through all of these hot topics. We will empower you with information and education. We will advocate and we will stand in the gap for you, because we are nurses and this is what we do. I'm your host, Nurse Kimberly Overton, and you can find me here every Wednesday morning at 10 a.m. Eastern. Until next time, be safe, be well, and God bless. Remember that we are in a war for truth. We are putting out a bounty on the real misinformation and exposing the purveyors of propaganda. No topic is off limits as we shine our light and expose the darkness.
It's time